The order does not pass through debate, it triggers automatically. Within the observer network, a threshold has been crossed. Qin Hao's actions are no longer classifiable as anomaly, insurgency, or ideological deviation. They are redefined as systemic interference. A designation appears across sealed channels. No names attached, no votes recorded. The system itself has decided. Across 3 regions, cultivators embedded within infrastructure activate simultaneously. Airports stall, power grids reroute. Entire city blocks experience momentary blackouts. Not failures, but isolations. Qin Hao's movement vectors collapse inward as probabilities narrow. This is not an assassination, it is erasure. They intend to remove Qin Hao from causality itself, strip his connections, nullify his past, and let the world forget him cleanly. Qin Hao feels it happening. Memories around him blur. A shopkeeper fails to recognize him mid-conversation. A security camera records static where his body should be. The dog-eye screams, not in pain, but in resistance. They are not attacking his body. They are attacking his existence as a reference point. Qin Hao stops running. At the center of a half-built overpass, surrounded by skeletal concrete and wind, he plants his feet. The observer's suppression layers close in, compressing reality into something brittle and airless. This is where his grandfather would have disappeared. Qin Hao refuses to follow. He opens every return pathway at once, not violently, deliberately. The effect is catastrophic in ways no one predicted. Stolen destinies surge back, not as chaos, but as weight. Observers across regions stagger as karmic debt flood systems never designed to carry it. Cultivators collapse, blood spilling from mouths as internal seals rupture. The system does not break, it overloads. For the first time, the observers experience what they have been exporting for generations. Consequence. Qin Hao feels it too. Being a node means bearing flow. His body trembles as timelines brush against him, lives he was never meant to touch, deaths that should not remember him. The dog-eye dims, cracks spreading across its light. He may not survive this, but the erasure halts, abruptly. The termination authority stalls as something intervenes, not an observer faction, not Yan Luo's group. The reservoir. It does not attack the observers, it withdraws support. The fate management system, deprived of its stabilizing sink, begins to unravel at the edges. Calculations fail, corrections backfire. The observers are forced to disengage. Qin Hao collapses to one knee, breath ragged but present. When the pressure finally lifts, the world snaps back into coherence, damaged, altered, but undeniably moving. Qin Hao remains. Not hidden, not erased, visible. And visibility is something the observers can no longer afford to ignore. They did not shut him down. They proved they no longer can. The observers do not fracture along moral lines. They fracture along fear. Within hours of the failed termination, sealed communication channels light up with contradiction. Orders are issued and countermanded in the same breath. Entire monitoring cells go dark, not destroyed, but deliberately disconnected. For the first time in centuries, the observers no longer agree on what survival means. One faction pushes for immediate restoration of absolute control. They argue that Qin Hao's continued existence proves that transparency is a fatal weakness. If the system cannot erase him quietly, then force must replace subtlety. They begin activating legacy weapons, ritual arrays buried beneath cities, dormant constructs fed by centuries of harvested fate. The other faction, Yan Luo's faction, moves just as decisively. They do not defend Qinhao directly. They sabotage. Containment pylons fail. Correction arrays misfire. Critical data archives corrupt themselves from the inside. These observers understand something their counterparts refuse to accept. The system cannot return to what it was. Balance has already been redefined, and systems that refuse to evolve become liabilities. Across multiple regions, cultivators clash openly for the first time. No disguises, no proxies. Talismans burn in the open air. Seals rupture rooftops. Ordinary people witness fragments of a war they were never meant to see. Buildings collapsing without cause. Storms forming against clear skies. Streets emptied by sudden, unexplainable dread. The age of invisible management ends. And in every report, one name appears again and again. Qinhao. Qinhao does not command an army. He does not issue declarations. He becomes a focal point by necessity. As observer factions move to secure or destroy Azure dragon sites, the reservoir's circulation pathways respond violently to conflict. Areas around Qinhao stabilize, not peacefully but coherently. Fate flows around him differently, as if recognizing a reference it can no longer ignore. This makes him a target. At an abandoned transit hub, 3 observer strike units converge simultaneously, 2 loyalist cells and 1 splinter group acting without authorization. Their objectives contradict each other, but their methods do not. Neutralize Qinhao. The confrontation is immediate and unmistakable. Suppressive fields slam down, warping gravity. Probability denial constructs attempt to lock Qinhao in place. He counters not with force, but with alignment, opening return pathways in precise arcs, redirecting pressure instead of absorbing it. The dog eye flickers, it is weakening. Being a node exacts a toll. Yanluo's faction intervenes, not visibly, but surgically. A loyalist array collapses mid-activation. A strike leader hesitates for half a second too long as his internal seals desynchronize. That half second saves Qinhao's life. The battle spills into the open. Civilians see it, not clearly, but enough. Enough to know the world is larger, stranger, and less stable than they were told. When it ends, the transit hub is destroyed. 2 observer units are eliminated. 1 retreats. Qinhao stands amid the wreckage, exhausted, bleeding, alive. This was not a skirmish, it was a declaration. The observers are no longer a single entity, they are factions at war. And Qinhao, whether he wants it or not, has become the axis around which that war turns. Not because he seeks power, but because the system cannot decide whether to erase him or follow him. And indecision in systems built on control is the most dangerous state of all. The first awakenings are dismissed as stress. Doctors call it mass hallucination. Psychologists label it collective trauma response. Governments release statements about experimental aircraft, power fluctuations, rare atmospheric effects. None of the explanations hold. Because the awakenings are not visions, they are corrections. Across the city where the transit hub collapsed, people begin to notice inconsistencies, memories that do not align with records, moments where luck abruptly reversed, places that feel heavier than they should. A woman realizes she has been avoiding the same street for years without knowing why. A taxi driver remembers a passenger who never existed, yet left behind a wallet that no one claims. Most disturbing of all, some people start to see patterns, thin lines of pressure in the air, subtle distortions around certain buildings, a sense of presence that flares briefly, then fades as if something passed through and forgot to close the door behind it. These people are not cultivators. They have no training, no protection, no language for what they perceive. But they are awake. The observers understand the danger immediately. Awakening spreads faster than suppression. Once a person notices a fracture in causality, it cannot be unseen. Memory adjusts, perception recalibrates. The world no longer fits cleanly into the shape it was taught to hold. And every awakened ordinary human becomes an uncontrolled variable. Chin Hao encounters them by accident. At a roadside cafe, the owner looks at him too long, then flinches as if burned. She does not recognize him, but she recognizes something. Her hands shake as she pours tea. "You don't belong to the quiet version of things," she says softly, surprising them both. Chin Hao feels the dog-eye pulse weakly in response. This is new. The reservoir's circulation has thinned the veil, enough that some people, those already pressured by misaligned fate, can sense nodes like him instinctively. Not clearly, not safely. Awakening is not empowerment, it is exposure. In another district, a group of teenagers film a confrontation between observer cells before the footage is wiped from every platform within minutes. Still, copies persist, fragmented, degraded, but shared. The comments explode with arguments, fear, disbelief. Something is wrong with the world. People feel it. And systems built on secrecy begin to choke. Within observer ranks, panic spreads. Open conflict was never meant to include civilians. The more ordinary people awaken, the harder correction becomes. You cannot erase millions without consequence. Yan Luo contacts Chin Hao with urgency. "This is the cost," she says. "You opened circulation, now perception follows." Chin Hao understands. The reservoir is not forcing awakening, it is allowing it. Because awareness is another form of flow. But awareness without structure leads to collapse, panic, cult formation, false prophets, weaponized belief. Humans will try to explain what they sense, and many explanations will be wrong. Dangerously wrong. Chin Hao makes a decision that frightens even Yan Luo. He does not try to hide. He moves publicly, subtly, but deliberately, allowing himself to be seen by those already on the edge of awakening. Not to teach them cultivation, not to recruit, to anchor. Where he passes, anomalies stabilize, fear lessens. Perception sharpens without shattering. People do not gain power, but they regain coherence. The observers notice immediately. This is worse than rebellion. Chin Hao is becoming a reference point for ordinary humans. A myth forming in real time, not named, not understood, but felt. And once ordinary people begin to orient themselves around something outside the system, control becomes impossible to restore. The war is no longer hidden, and it is no longer confined to those who chose to enter it. True awakening is quiet. False awakening is loud. Within days of the veil thinning, explanations begin to multiply. Not from scholars or cultivators, but from those who feel the tremor and rush to name it before fear does. Online forums erupt with theories. Private chat groups become echo chambers. Old superstitions rebrand themselves as revelation. Most of these people are not malicious, they are afraid. Fear demands structure, and when real structure is absent, imagination fills the gap. Self-proclaimed guides appear, men and women who claim to feel the shift more strongly than others. They describe symptoms ordinary people recognize: pressure behind the eyes, recurring dreams, moments of déjà vu sharpened into certainty. They promise interpretation, safety, purpose. Some even believe their own words. The problem is not that they lie, it is that belief, once shared, begins to feed back into the reservoir's circulation. The observers detect the anomaly quickly. Belief, concentrated and aligned, begins to behave like a low-grade force. Not cultivation, but influence. Local probability bends subtly around gatherings of the faithful. Coincidences stack. Charismatic leaders experience improbable luck. To the untrained eye, it looks like proof. To Chin Hao, it feels wrong. These nodes do not stabilize pressure. They amplify distortion. The first cult collapses violently. In a coastal city, a group calling themselves the Returned Path gathers nightly. Their leader claims to channel a sleeping guardian beneath the land. Members report shared dreams, synchronized heartbeats, an overwhelming sense of belonging. What they are actually experiencing is resonance, unmanaged, unstable resonance. When the pressure exceeds tolerance, the result is catastrophic. 3 members suffer psychological fractures. 1 dies of internal organ failure without physical trauma. The leader vanishes the same night, leaving behind a room where gravity feels wrong for hours. Footage leaks, panic follows. More groups form anyway. Yan Luo warns Chin Hao, suppression will only validate the false leaders. Erasure creates martyrs, silence becomes confirmation. Belief is no longer passive. It is active, volatile, and contagious. Chin Hao intervenes indirectly. He does not confront the cult leaders. He collapses their resonance. By subtly realigning circulation near their gathering points, he drains the pressure that made belief feel powerful. Miracles stop. Coincidences dry up. Leaders lose certainty. Followers lose the emotional reinforcement that held them together. Most groups dissolve quietly. A few do not. One faction adapts. They stop claiming supernatural power. They claim interpretation. They say the world is changing because a hidden war has begun, and that neutrality is impossible. They frame belief not as mysticism, but as allegiance. Us versus them. Awake versus asleep. This alarms even the observers, because belief shaped into identity becomes uncorrectable without violence. Chin Hao understands the danger fully now. Awakening without guidance does not lead to enlightenment. It leads to gods made of fear, idols built from pressure, and leaders who mistake attention for truth. The reservoir responds, not with force, with refusal. Circulation tightens around belief-heavy zones, making further amplification harder. The system is learning, but slowly, imperfectly. Chin Hao realizes something chilling. This is what his grandfather sealed. A way, not power, not monsters. Human belief, once given structure outside the system, becomes the most dangerous variable of all. And now it is loose,